Hello. I just want to thank everybody for coming. Welcome to Remembering Red Hill from the Red Hill Registry. We have some very special guests today, and I'm excited to listen to their stories. I want to cover a few things before we begin. First, I just want to give a land acknowledgement and just acknowledge that the University of Hawaii and the communities that we serve, they sit on ancestral lands of the Kanaka Oiwi, the native Hawaiian people. We honor those deep connections to this place and their stewardship of Vai and their enduring role as caretakers of this land. Before I introduce my panelists, I want to kind of acquaint everybody with some of the features during the meeting. One, you'll see down across the bottom, there's different options. We are using the Q&A feature today, which will allow participants to share things with anonymity, if that's the preference. And so to find that, if you move your mouse to the bottom of the screen, you'll see all the way to the right, a circle with 3 dots that says more. And when you click on that, you should see a feature for Q&A. And once you type in there, it goes directly to the moderators, my team. And you have the option to share what you're saying as yourself or put it as anonymous so that even we won't know who put that message in. The feature that we're using that for, I don't know if anybody saw on our social media, we were launching a hashtag campaign of Remembering Red Hill, where we just really want to recognize all the different stories that are coming out of what happened 4 years ago at the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility and the water contamination and how that impacted all of our lives. Some people had really significant impacts and some people had, less of a significant impact. And every one of those stories is valuable and important to recognize and respect. So what we're doing throughout this meeting is inviting everybody as you listen to our guests and they share from their own personal perspectives. If something bubbles up and you remember something from your own story, feel free to use that Q&A feature. You can type just a few words about how you're feeling, or you can type a full story. And what my team is going to do is kind of collect all of that and synthesize it together so that we can share it at the end of this meeting, but also we'll put together a nice presentation of all of the different stories and things that people are sharing in that. So with that, I would like to now introduce my guests. I'm going to scroll through until I find them. Heidi, could you please? There we go. This is Heidi Nichols. Let me put the spotlight on for her. Heidi Nichols is quite a respected person. She is an archival researcher. She was born on Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam and has been documenting life stories of those who worked on the construction of the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility. She's going to share today from her perspective a little bit more. I'd also like to invite Mahealani. Can you please turn your camera on? Thank you so much. Mahealani Richardson. This is an award-winning journalist who has been covering Red Hill for quite a while, among other very important topics, and she works with Hawaii News Now. And then Ernie Lau, could you please turn your camera on? Thank you. And Ernie is the chief engineer and manager of Honolulu Board of Water Supply. I'm so thankful to have all of them here. This is quite an opportunity. So what I'm going to do is invite our guests to speak one at a time and share their stories from their own personal perspectives. Heidi, would you mind going first?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen because I'm using a lot of visuals today to do this. And so I will put that on the screen. Can you see this? Okay.
That's perfect.
You can see just the slide. Okay. Um, okay, thank you. I will try to keep in my time. And I am an academic, so this may feel a little bit more academic, but I'm also speaking from my heart and from my own biography in different ways. I want to say thank you to Tara and to the Red Hill Registry for organizing this event and for inviting me. And I'm really honored to be alongside Ernie Lau and Mahealani Richardson, and to get a chance to hear from also those attending, all of you. So thank you for being here. I am an assistant professor of sociology in upstate New York on Onondaga lands, and I am a historical sociologist, so that means I tend to think about contemporary social problems and political problems from the context of a much larger history, a historical context. And for the past few years, I have been slowly gathering archival material about Red Hill and also doing interviews with those impacted by Red Hill and organizing around Red Hill. And so I'm going to share a bit about my personal biography, my relationship to Oahu and to the military and to Red Hill. And then I'm also going to share with you some of those archival sources and how I've started to make sense of them, what they mean to me. And I just want to note that I'm speaking again from my positionality, um, and that there may be some things in here that you disagree with or that uh, put pressure points on certain topics. And I just want to note that, and I want to respect it because, like Tara said, a lot of us have been impacted in very different ways by Red Hill and by the larger structures around Red Hill. So I'll go into kind of who I am for you. Like Tara said, I was born on Oahu at Tripler Army Medical Center, and my parents were stationed at Hickam, and we left the island when I was a toddler, but then came back about a decade later. Um, and I attended high school in Nu'uanu at HBA, and my family lived in Kaneohe for most of our time there. And then my parents actually moved back on base from 2016 to 2021. And they left Oahu at the beginning of the summer of 2021, so they weren't directly impacted that we know of um, by the fuel spill in the way that many people were. But since that time, I've been returning to Oahu to visit friends and to conduct archival research on other projects. And as a teenager living in Kaneohe, I also want to note that I frequently went on base with my parents and recognized the ways that military families, especially those on base, lived in kind of a different world than the rest of Oahu. Um, And as I grew older, I came to see those dividing lines, like being on and off base, having to show my ID for what it really is. You know, it's armed checkpoints, surveyed borders, and fairly unequal societies, typical of contexts where military occupation structures everyday life. And the real history of Hawaii and Oahu was very lovingly taught to me by Kanaka Maoli friends and teachers and mentors and coaches during my adolescence. And I think also difficult experiences on Oahu taught me what my presence as a haole and military dependent represented in the face of Hawaii's history and the growth of military presence and also tourism. So when the news of Red Hill broke, the major fuel spill in 2021, I had just returned from a long stay on Oahu where I reconnected with friends and the island. And I grieved for all of those harmed, for the health of everyone on Oahu, and also for the aquifer. And I remember writing down at that time, eventually, this empire will make all of us sick. So I also returned to history, to my kind of love of history and my search in historical records for answers and to the roots of the problems we face today. And there are many points in historical archives where we are able to meet the ghosts of contemporary disasters, those who may have unknowingly played a role in making the world what it is today. And these are all images of Red Hill workers that have been held in the National Archives at College Park, Maryland, in the Military Still Pictures Division. And in looking at their forms and their faces for many hours, I had this question of kind of, did they know what would happen? Did they sense that this was a really bad idea, even in the throes of World War II? Their presence in the archive, as sociologist Avery Gordon writes, alters the experience of being in time, the ways we separate the past, present, and the future, and reminds us that we too work within larger forces that have deep impacts for generations to come. And the time I've spent with these records has taught me that the living, breathing humans present in the archive still have a role to play as we remember Red Hill. They provide portals for those of us struggling with our own relationships to the military, to war, to state power, and to the past and future of Hawaii. Like those impacted by Red Hill a lifetime later, the men and women who worked at Red Hill Camp and contributed to its construction were very diverse. We know that about a third of them came from the continent, but two-thirds came from the island itself. And there were many local and some Native Hawaiian workers who labored in shifts around the clock. They worked to survive, to provide for their families, and some were injured and killed in the process. And from their own varied backgrounds, they each were part of this network of power that probably could not be comprehended at the time. Perhaps at this time of war, they did not see Red Hill as also profoundly violent. Violent towards the Aina, the Vai, towards Native Hawaiians, and to all those who would ingest its poison decades later. But the caverns and tanks they constructed would also be used to store the fuel for future violence, fuel to power militarism across Oceania and beyond. And then for Red Hill Camp itself, life was really structured by colonial and racial inequalities. The bosses and supervisors were predominantly white and from the continent, while the most dangerous and uncomfortable jobs were given to Japanese, Filipino, Kanaka, and other local workers. These men filled the teams of mucking crews, breaking up and removing dirt, heavy rocks, and debris. And the Morrison Knudsen Company was a contracted company by the US military that helped oversee construction. Their archives demonstrate how race was a factor in recruitment choices. So, for example, a 1946 article by Morrison Knudsen covering Red Hill stated that there were, quote, about 800 Japanese and an equal number of Filipinos whose size and nimbleness ideally fitted them for structural work in cramped places, end quote. And then after December 7th and the enactment of martial law, Japanese workers had to wear these special badges that identified them as Japanese and limited their access throughout Red Hill Camp and the work site. So in this way, the racial division of labor at Red Hill created this subterranean underclass whose presence in the archive was also obscured. Within the deep caverns of the underground, most people are present only as these kind of pictorial blemishes. They appear only as blurs, bits of material within an earthen tomb, scattered amongst rocks, rubbish, and tools, and made very tiny from the scale of the tanks. and they were erased by a shutter speed aimed at chronicling progress towards the project's completion. These images conjure up feelings relayed to me by interview participants in the present of being trapped, of being made disposable, and sometimes silenced. And when a resident of Oahu ingested the petroleum that had been stockpiled within these tanks beneath Kapukaki, they brought into their bodies those life worlds that were never meant to be in the same place at the same time. Fuel is made from a mix of crude oil and hydrocarbons, and crude oil is the result of millions of years of pressure and heat applied to the physical remains of living organisms. The life and death of beings that lived on this planet, but in entirely different worlds, remain in the geological record and are extracted and remade to power the world as it now exists. One profoundly shaped by war. And when this happens, time collapses and does frightful things to human neurology, skin, respiratory systems, and various other physical functioning. People have been profoundly harmed, and my interviews have shown me one small part of that. So, like Red Hill workers, those harmed by Red Hill since 2021 lived and worked within large institutions, many of them at least, for military projects that they also don't know or do not know the full and future impact of. And so, as we remember Red Hill, I think it's important to remember that from its inception, Red Hill created and reinforced racial and colonial hierarchies that dovetailed with the military's disregard for the future of Oahu's lands and waters. Just as some workers at Red Hill were rendered disposable, so too was Oahu's water, and those dynamics live on in the afterlife of Red Hill. This past May, the Department of War, so named now, announced plans to construct a fuel facility in Papua New Guinea, a $400 million facility that could hold 70 million gallons of fuel. And this is often linked to the closure of the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility by military news outlets like this one shown here. So to me, as I reflect on Red Hill and what it means to me, it's a sign that one of the largest contributors to climate change, the US military, in its strategic plan for climate readiness, it's more of the same. Armed checkpoints, surveyed borders, and plans for radically unequal societies where those most vulnerable will surely endure the harshest ecological and health impacts. And as the Red Hill Registry serves the needs of all those impacted, I have been really inspired by the many ways that various communities, foremost Kanaka Maoli, have seen the connections between Red Hill and the ways the US military continues to harm human lives and ecologies around the world. The organizing and solidarities formed in the struggle to protect Oahu's water has truly inspired me. So I want to thank many of you for all of your efforts for many, many years. And like others have noted, it is everyone's responsibility to struggle against the military's war on planetary life. Mahalo.
Thank you. My computer is slow to react. That was really powerful. I appreciate everything that you just shared. I'm going to so sorry. Ernie, would you please turn your camera on and I'm going to let you share from your own personal experience next. Thank you.
Thank
Ernie, I
you.
appreciate you being here today and I look forward to your perspective.
I just want to start by saying thank you, Heidi, for your research and what you shared was very powerful. And uh, go Eagles. Hawaii Baptist Academy is where my two daughters also went. Um, for me, the decisions made over 80 years ago to actually build the underground fuel tank farm at Red Hill at Kapukaki was something that was very deliberate. Uh, they knew exactly what they were doing. Um, they also knew that it was being built right over precious freshwater aquifer. Because at the same time they were building the Red Hill fuel tanks, they were building Red Hill Shaft, which is connected to the same underground tunnel system. And some of the pipelines coming out of Red Hill Shaft that carry water to Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, in those very same tunnels run the fuel lines alongside it. So they knew what was being done. And unfortunately, those decisions, I guess decisions to know that this facility, this massive facility, could be a threat to our water resources. Though I think they knew that very well, because in time they developed plans to actually what they call groundwater protection plans, but it was really about how protecting the Red Hill Shaft from contamination from the fuel tank facility. Uh, so, so those images, uh, are haunting to me. Um, and I know that some would say that 4 years after the contamination of the drinking water system at Red Hill and the effect on 93,000 people, uh, it's not an anniversary; it's a remembrance. And I just feel extremely sad that so many people had to get hurt before the military decided to shut it down to close the facility. But what Heidi is sharing is that's just moving the problem to other communities in other countries or in other island communities. But anyway, Tara, I'll just stop there before I ramble on anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernie. Um, I appreciate you being here and being able to share the way that you are. Mahealani, can you please turn your camera on? Hi. Uh, I'm gonna go ahead and spotlight you for everybody, and I'll take my camera off and just let you share as well. And then we'll have a guided conversation.
Aloha mai kako. Tara, thank you so much for having us all here today on this anniversary. And it's really an honor for me personally to be speaking after Ernie and Heidi. I really am not worthy for something like this. I was sharing with Tara earlier that this is the first time that I am speaking as a part of an event like this. Usually I'm the reporter anchor who's covering it, grabbing sound bites and trying to throw something on the news at 6 o'clock. So this is really a new experience. So thank you all for being here. On this anniversary, I wanted to highlight just a couple of the touch points very early on in those early days of the tainted water crisis that kept me going as a journalist. I have 30 years experience as an anchor and a journalist. I've never, ever covered any story like this before. And it was during that Thanksgiving weekend, we started getting messages into our newsroom that something was wrong. And it was these military wives that were calling us and emailing us and sending us messages on social media that something was wrong with their water. And so we did some interviews on Zoom and they sent us pictures of their oily water. And for the first few days, it was all online. And I knew immediately that whatever was happening at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam and those surrounding neighborhoods was not just a crisis, it was a disaster of national, international importance. And we couldn't just cover the story over Zoom. And mind you, we were still in the middle of COVID, so we were doing everything over Zoom. And so we had made a connection with a woman who lived at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam named Jamie Simic. And I know, Jamie, you're on this Zoom today. And I asked her, can we go to your house? Can we see what people are complaining about and why people are getting sick and what is it they exactly are talking about? And so we agreed to meet off base. We left my car, our car. I was with photographer Peter Tang, and we jumped in her car with her daughter, her son, and her dog, and we drove to Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam right through the main gate there. And I have to admit, I was scared. I was scared seeing the military police with their long guns, and I'm thinking, okay, I shouldn't be here. I know I shouldn't be here, but I really need to get this story and I need to see what people are talking about. And so we went through and I just looked straight ahead and, she drove through and my heart is racing. We go to her house and she starts showing us her water. She shows how she washed her daughter's hair with bottled water so that the oily, smelly water wouldn't touch their skin. She showed us their ice cubes, which were arranged from off-white to light yellow to very dark yellow. And that was shocking to me. And then Jamie said that you really need to go into my shower, into the master shower, because that's where the oil is the worst. And so we did. And so she ran the water for 10 minutes, the hot water, and she closed the door and I opened the door and whew, all the fumes come out. And so then my part as a journalist is to describe what I'm seeing. And so Peter started filming me with my clothes on, of course, going into the shower, and I turn on the water and I'm feeling the water. And it was nothing like I felt before. And it was exactly how she explained it. It was oily and kind of gritty when it dried. And when I smelt it, it smelled weird. I had never smelt that smell before. It just smelled like some sort of oil. It didn't smell like gasoline. It just smelled like an oil that I had never smelled before. And I felt the water on my feet. And I'm thinking, if you're in the shower with the water raining down on you, you could slip and fall. And so I'm describing on camera what I'm seeing, what I'm smelling, what I'm feeling. And I hear Jamie start to gag outside in another room. And she is vomiting because the smell is causing her system to retch. And so we finish shooting our reporter stand-ups and I go outside to see her and she is crying. She is crying because what we saw, according to Jamie, validated what she had been complaining about for days, for weeks, and months. And that she said that people were making her feel like she was crazy. And by us being there in her house, we were validating that it wasn't just something that was in her head. And it was that first story that I am so thankful for, even though it was very painful for Jamie and her children, because it gave me the inspiration to lean in and to dig in to this Red Hill crisis. It wasn't a crisis. I actually relabeled it as a disaster. It was a disaster that impacted more than 90,000 water users on the water line along Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam. It sickened more than 6,000 people, military members, according to the military, which I know the numbers are greater than that because those are just the numbers that the military gave to me. There were many other civilians that were sickened and other military members as well who probably didn't go to their initial clinics. And so I am so grateful that folks like Jamie trusted us, being complete strangers, let us into their homes to show us, to let us see what they were talking about. And future stories that came within days, I also knew that we had to test the water ourselves because we were not getting any answers from the military. And so word got out that we were going to do our own independent testing. And so I met some people off base, and they literally, these women, these military women, threw these water bottles at me in desperation. And they said, please test my water, please test my water. And so we took their water bottles and we tested it ourselves with FQ Labs. And the results came back that there was a trace amount of diesel. And I remember telling a woman in a nearby church, she had been running a church just off base. And I said, according to our results, your water has trace amounts of diesel in it. And she said, oh my word. She couldn't believe it. And then off camera, she said, what am I going to do? And I didn't have any answers for her. She said, you know, our church just bought this property from the Navy 2 years ago. What are we going to do? And I said, you know, I can't give you advice, but I do know you should probably get a lawyer. And so that story pushed us again to keep covering these stories. I have to give credit to Ernie Lau for continuing to talk to the public about what was going on because people were desperate for answers. And I remember clearly during Ernie's, one of his very initial press conferences, speaking about this disaster. And anyone who knows Ernie, he doesn't wear his emotions on his sleeve. He's very analytical, he's very methodical, very reasoned. But he was fighting back his emotions as he was talking about the contamination of our water system. And I was back in our newsroom and I was listening to him speak, and I'm seeing this very long time public servant fighting back these emotions. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is really, really serious. And I kept saying that to our newsroom over and over again, because sometimes in the news, we get desensitized to bad things that are happening in our community. And over again, I kept saying, guys, this is real. This is serious. We need to keep going. And I'm glad to say that the military, for as many times as they tried to cloud the issue, they always gave me a response. Even though the response may have been short, it wasn't exactly an answer. They always tried to answer my questions. Tried. Almost a year later, we went to Washington, D.C. Mandy Fite told me that there was going to be a protest to the EPA. And so I asked my bosses, can I go cover this protest? And my bosses at Hawaii News Now said yes, which I couldn't believe it because they were going to let me fly all the way across the country to go cover this protest. And so we covered the protest where they were shouting, EPA, do your job. And during that time, I had sent a request to the Pentagon for us to do an interview. And when we got there to DC, we didn't know if we had approval to go into the Pentagon. But about 10 hours before I had a window of opportunity, they said, yes, you can come in. And so I was able to interview Brigadier General Pat Ryder, the spokesman for the Pentagon, about the water contamination and what the military was going to do to remove all of that fuel from those tanks. And I'm proud to say that I believe, arguably, I might be the only Hawaii journalist to have been allowed into the Pentagon to ask questions. I believe I am the first journalist to go onto Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam to see the water for myself. And we knew that the military had to answer our questions. Our little local news station, they had to answer us because this was of national importance. But all throughout these stories, I wanted to say a warm mahalo to those mama bears, those military women who spoke out for their families, who were protecting their keiki, protecting their water, and protecting all of us, trying to trying to protect all of us from future contamination. I mean, their husbands couldn't speak, their children couldn't speak, but it was them. And they have been the tip of the spear, sending me text messages, just letting me know, hey, go chase after this. Moms like Mandy and Chris and Kat and Jamie, all of them have dug in, which in turn caused me to keep going no matter how hard it got to tell this story. They gave me inspiration to keep going. And I wanted to let all of them know, and all of you know, that this story that we are covering is not over. I have not forgotten what happened at Kapukaki and at Red Hill, and all of the thousands of people who were impacted and forced to not drink their water for months. I have not forgotten. And so because I have not forgotten, the public will not forget. And I just wanted to say mahalo nui, and thank you for having me here today.
Thank you so much for that very, very powerful story. I'm so thankful that you are here today. Ernie and Heidi, can you guys please turn your cameras on? Okay, what I'd like to do now is just kind of, I'm going to ask a few questions and we'll just kind of go around and have a conversation about some of these topics. Everybody who's here, I want to remind you to use the Q&A feature. If you are looking for it, go to the bottom of your screen, and all the way to the right, there is a more, or like a question mark, and you can open that up and see the Q&A feature. Please share any bits of your story, what you're thinking, what you're feeling, anything that you want to share in that. And you can click to share anonymously if you would like, but my team is going to compile what people are sharing in there so that we can have time for what the community is saying and how that reflection looks at the end. But to the three of you, Mahealani, Ernie, and Heidi, I want to ask, when you think back to the beginning and when you first understood the potential impacts of the water crisis, how did that experience influence your sense of Kuleana? Mahealani, you kind of touched on that a little bit. I'm going to start with you, but go ahead.
My sense of Kuleana, I will say that before the Red Hill disaster, I took water for granted. I grew up and still believe for the most part that our water in Hawaii, and I've lived in many different places, is the cleanest and the purest in the world. And it tastes pretty good. But after this, after Red Hill, it reminded me that water is so precious and we need our water. And so my kuleana is to tell the stories of our environment, of Native Hawaiians, and stories that affect people. And it's not just my kuleana, it's everyone's kuleana. We need to continue to vocalize what happened, and we need to shed light on what's happening in the future, even though it might be scary. And I challenge anyone out there to continue to tell their personal stories, because if we stop talking, people will forget and just move on with their lives. And perhaps the worst thing that could happen is, at this point, indifference. And we cannot be indifferent to what's happening to Hawaii and to our Aina.
So true. Ernie, can you talk about when you think back and how the gravity of the situation impacted your sense of Kuleana?
I've been involved with water off and on for almost 46 years now. When I was a young child, I came to visit the Board of Water Supply and saw the artesian water gush out of a pipe in the ground in front of our offices. I've always been fascinated with water, but the situation that started 11 years ago for me back in 2014 just reinforced the importance of the mission of the Board of Water Supply, our responsibility, our kuleana, to provide safe drinking water to our community, but also, even more importantly, to be the an advocate to protect our water resources and to try to make those that damage, that hurt our make them accountable for what they've done to correct those hurts and injuries. So I would say the Red Hill issue is us for the Board of Water Supplies reinforced our kuleana that goes beyond just putting water in the pipe. So when Mahealani wakes up in the morning, she can turn on her tap and the water flows. It goes beyond that because it goes back to the gift of these precious water resources that Keakua has given all of us on Oahu. That we need to treat that and malama that gift. It is precious.
Truly, truly. Heidi, can you speak back to when you think about when you first understood the potential impacts of this event? How did that experience influence your sense of kuleana here?
Yeah, thank you. I I was told by a Hawaiian scholar, Noelani Goodyear Kapua, a long time ago that I should do research like with my own community, with like the base community. Um, in the sense that like that is my kuleana, like that's the community I come from. And I'm not there anymore, but that is my community, you know, for better, for worse. And growing up, seeing the ways that people near to me and people in those spaces did not see or feel the real history of Hawaii, like I said, and did not understand their place in the world because of that, was very difficult. And so when Red Hill in 2021 first broke, it felt like a horrible thing to grieve, but it also felt and struggle against, but it also felt like, okay, maybe some of like my people will wake up almost, and they will see the potential for harm, the very real harms that have been there all along. And so I think for me, my responsibility was to speak from who I am to those people. And I think that's in a way what I've tried to do today, that like I just wanted to respond to Ernie's point, like, yes, like I think in the 1940s, the military officials and the contractors and those in charge very much knew what was going on. But I think a lot of times the military families and members, they don't like think of themselves as contributing to or participating in like the long future impacts of some of what the military is doing on Oahu or around the world. And so trying to tell that story, given the skills I have and given my positionality, I feel like is part of my kuleana. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. I very much relate to what you are describing. Coming from the military community myself, being a military spouse, but also an academic. At the beginning of this, when I've started understanding the depth of the impacts and the way that people's lives are being changed, not just in the military, but also for the island. And then I slowly started understanding that there was a long history of this facility and the contamination. And, just I remember the shock just coming in layers as I understood, especially coming here from someplace else, learning the history of Hawaii was first and foremost, but then just the depth of Red Hill alone. And my husband was active duty, still is active duty. And so I was, kind of scared to hold the sign on the street corner, or, but I didn't know how that would impact his career or our ability to live in the house that we lived in. That it was our health insurance, it's our sole income, everything. And so, what I decided to do, I was an undergraduate at the time, and I just took all of my focus and what I thought I would invest my research time in, and I changed gears and I just started researching the effects of the water crisis on my neighbors, on my friends, and interviewing people for, research. And I was like, these are the tools I have. This is what I can do. And my husband won't get in trouble. um, I would like to know if you could go back and tell your past self something from the start of the water crisis. What would you say to yourself? Heidi, can you please go first?
Oh man. Okay, what would I say to myself? Well, I want to say, like I'm not maybe suited to answer this question as much as Ernie and Mahealani. I wasn't there, those first few months. I had just gotten back to the continent and but I mean, I saw and I have heard from my interviews with people and the stories they have shared with me, the ways in which um people's relationships really became centrally important. That relationships with one another and the ability to like meet each other's needs amidst the first few weeks and months of the disaster was foremost. Like I think, and that's something that we can carry into many different kinds of disasters. Um, it's the people, it's the relationships, it's the community, and also the kind of willingness to step outside your community, even though it's uncomfortable, to give and receive help, both material help, but also emotional support. That is what really mattered. Like it wasn't the military, right? It wasn't the military that was meeting those needs in the early days for sure. And so, just like with everything, I think I would, you know, echo back what I've heard that the relationships are the most important, and developing our communities now is what is going to ultimately sustain like the political and social movements, about Red Hill and beyond.
Ernie, let's, I'd like to hear from you on that.
Yeah,
What would you go back and tell yourself knowing what you do now? And you knew so much then, and we're trying to tell people since 2014, but
I if I could tell myself 11 years ago, back in 2014, when I first learned about this situation, I would tell myself, don't hold back. You need to do everything in your power to sound the alarm bells, to tell people that this is a disaster waiting to happen, and a avoidable disaster. And something that I think if I could go back 11 years, I would have fought even harder with the challenge of this is that I was fighting not only the military, we were not only fighting the military, but we seemed to be battling our own regulators, our Department of Health and our EPA. And I appreciate those people. They work very hard, but I think I would have pressed harder for them to not work with the Navy to try to prolong the use of this facility, which was the initial approach back in 2014, 2015, but to actually look at shutting it down. I should have, yeah, I would tell myself, just fight it to the very death to force them to close this, and to tell everybody on the island that this is a disaster waiting to happen. If I could do it again, I'd start that effort back in 2014. regardless of the consequences.
Mhm. That just makes me think so deeply. Mehealani, what do you wish you could tell your past self at the start of the water crisis?
Um, that's a hard question to answer, but I will say I don't think any of us anticipated that it would be continuing today, and now that there would be continuing litigation and continuing conflict and continuing questions over the safety of the water. At least none of us in our newsroom thought that. It was maybe initially thought, oh, this is going to be a disaster, and then it happens, and then people move on, and we move on to the next thing. I felt as though I dug pretty hard with my stories, but I feel like I could have dug even deeper. And I remember the time going back to Jamie Simick's house when we were editing our story, just after spending about an hour in her house, I felt weird. Like I had a slight headache and I felt a bit foggy and just I was struggling to write my story, and I went over to my photographer Peter Tang's desk as he was editing, and I said, "Hey Peter, are you feeling kind of weird?" And he said, "Yeah, I have a slight headache too, and I'm not sure what it is." And if I were to tell myself, I would tell myself to continue to remember that, because it reminded me that, geez, we were only in her house for an hour, and people who lived along that water line, they live there. That is their home. That is supposed to be a safe place where they can retreat to, and it wasn't. And so if I were to tell myself, I would tell myself to keep going back to that, because covering the story was very difficult. It was very difficult because it wasn't always black and white. The regulators, the members of the military, we started to see them as they weren't just these faceless entities. They were human beings trying to do right after a very, very bad wrong. And so I would continue to tell myself to go back to those early days, to give myself spiritual renewal and energy to keep pushing harder.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as somebody who, as you say, I was in the home. Um, One of the things that often gets forgotten, and you kind of touched on it, and it made me remember, this happened during the Delta surge of COVID. So the widespread messaging was stay home, stay home. Home is the only place that's safe. And home was not safe. Home was not safe. And as my kids were adult kids, but kids from, it doesn't matter if they're 18 or toddlers, they're still your children, your babies, right? And they get that headache. And the first thing you say is, oh, honey, have you drank water? We'll drink some more water. Yeah, there's a lot that I would tell myself if I could go back to the beginning. I'm going to ask one more question that I have prepared, but the question and answer from the guests is not just being like we were expecting it to be used for people to kind of share their story, but some people are actually putting questions. And if there's time, I was wondering if it would be okay if I, posed a couple of those to you guys. If okay. Before we get to that, the last question that I have prepared is I just wanted to know in what ways your personal and your professional worlds have intersected. You three have very different professional worlds, and I would just like to hear that. Oh, sorry, I didn't. Ernie, can you please start us off?
This is I'd like to kind of stay behind the scenes and not be out there. Uh, but especially after the disaster in 2021 in November and the amount of great reporting, like Mahealani was, interviewing me and many others and did a great job. I kind of lost my privacy. Uh, I Yeah, it was a very odd feeling and a little embarrassing at times. That I'd walk into Long's or the supermarket and somebody would yell my name and but it just folks, we're just doing our job, our kuleana, and but that I think that was probably the hardest thing to adjust to. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
Mahealani, you did too good reporting on this. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Ernie, for taking us down into Halava Shaft. It almost felt like a spiritual experience down there looking at the purest and cleanest water. So we're so grateful.
Yeah, Ernie kind of became a celebrity overnight. There were bumper stickers. I love Ernie.
Yeah.
Um, go ahead. Did you have something else to say?
No, unfortunately, it's kind of dying down, so I can go out without a mask and a hat on and dark glasses. But thank you.
Heidi, how have your personal and professional worlds intersected?
Um, I feel like I'm maybe a little different in the sense that my personal experiences have, like propelled me to do what I do now. Um, and so they've always felt pretty intertwined. Um, I think for Red Hill, it kind of structured a lot of my life because I'm in a different time zone, and so like staying up really late to listen to meetings, CRI meetings, or to other events, or um, talking about it in my life here, and people on the continent not hearing about it at all, and not knowing it's going on, and that being another layer of kind of shock and disturbing to me in different ways. But it's been incredibly meaningful. It's been an incredible privilege to hear people's stories. It's been surprising to me, like the ways that despite different, like real differences that create and are like part of painful histories, people have come together. Um, and and so hearing those stories has been a profound privilege and helped me have more hope in my life when it comes to other kinds of challenges I see around me and here in New York and around the world. And it's also awakened in me more of a commitment to understand my own relationship to kind of state power and dream of a future where the world is made safe from these different ticking time bombs. So it's been a very meaningful uh, set of experiences.
Definitely. Mahealani, can you share a little how your personal and professional worlds have intersected?
Um, I guess unlike Ernie, my professional and my personal life is often intertwined, and I have a very mostly forgiving family, and taking phone calls at 6 o'clock in the morning and texting and calling, and especially now that the many of the Red Hill survivors live on the East Coast or elsewhere. With every disaster, the one thing that gives me hope is that it it is incredibly stressful, and I have spoken to many people who have been through terrible trauma. And I see it every single time. It's a physical trauma, it's a mental trauma, it's a trauma for the entire family. And many of the conversations that I've had, they didn't end up, let's say, being something that was splashed all over the news, but I just ended up listening. And I just remember countless conversations of just listening. And these people have become friends to me. And I feel and I hope that they can call me anytime. Um, and I cherish that a lot. I've learned so much about the military as well. My dad, I knew very little about the military before. And all of a sudden, my newsroom was treating me like I was the military reporter. And I couldn't believe that. My dad fought in Korea and he was in the army. And, as a joke, we would go to some press conferences because there was some sort of ceremony or it's Veterans Day, Memorial Day. That was basically my um, extent of exposure to the military. And this disaster uh, brought me face to face with more leaders, more commanders than I ever dreamed of. And often I felt like I was in over my head, but I also knew that my questions, my stories were oftentimes the conduit. And unfortunately, what I also saw is that because I was the conduit, sides were not often talking to each other. And so it was my job to be the middle and try to get one message to the other side. And so I take that responsibility and that kuleana again, very, very seriously, and I'm grateful for it.
Thank you.
Tara,
Yeah.
could I share one last thought on this? I think the other part personally for me was and please, folks that have come up to me in the supermarkets or Costco or wherever, don't get that wrong. I actually really I'm very honored, and I appreciate you coming up and expressing your gratefulness, because I also see that the beauty of all of this is that there is one thing that unites all of us, and that is safe drinking water. It's clean, fresh water unites all of us. And regardless of who we are, that is one, if not the most precious thing and I thank everybody that, acknowledge that. Those that come up to me, even though it's a little embarrassing, you bless me by just saying thank you. It makes all this work worth it. Thank you.
As somebody who drank the fuel, I thank you. I remember the first time I met you, Ernie, I was just like, totally starstruck and just felt like I wanted to say thank you a million times, and it just felt way too small. Um, all three of you tell people's stories, or are a voice for people who have felt silenced, and you do it in different ways, and it's very powerful. You know, one of you is the past, one of you is the present, and one of you is the future. And I'm so thankful for the ways that you guys have um, examined your own self and allowed this experience to intersect with your professional lives, and helped make the change that has taken place so far. And my hope is that that just continues. Um, I'm going to ask a couple of the questions that we received. Mahealani, there's two questions for you. One was, did you receive any kind of pushback from the military while you were reporting on this? But then there was another question, when it comes to the families in the military, what is one lasting memory that you carry? Could you share that?
Um, Yes, of course I received pushback from the military. This was not a story that the military wanted heard. And that was very clear from the beginning. Um, and we were very proud to be able, well, I shouldn't say proud. When the military wasn't giving any answers, we actually told the public that there was something, that there was diesel in the water hours before the Navy admitted that something was actually wrong in the water. And it shouldn't be that way. You know, we shouldn't have to be forced to go and spend all kind of money at FQ Labs to test the water. I mean, that's not our job as journalists, but we did. Um, and so, yeah, that was something that happened. Um, you know, as far as the takeaway, one thing that I saw, especially at that march in Washington, D.C., that Mandy Fight invited me to, was it, it's no secret that Hawaiians and Hawaii has a very complicated history with our military. It's incredibly complicated and it's incredibly deep. But for that one moment in time, and for many of the Red Hill events after, I was able to see Kanaka Maoli joining hands with members of the military. These military mama bears marching together for a single purpose, and that was clean water, protection of the Aina, protection of all of our children. And that to me was really, really significant. Um, we live in a world where it's incredibly fractured, incredibly divisive. But to see those moments of people coming together for a common cause, people from different facets of our community for that one common cause, um, that really struck me, and I will never forget it.
Thank you. Heidi, there was a question for you. How has your research impacted you personally after hearing individuals' stories over the past 4 years? What, if any, knowledge have you gained from hearing individual personal testimonies?
Um, there's a lot I've gained, and I'm still doing interviews, so I don't want to say anything too final. I think the story is still being told by all those who want to tell it, and it will continue to be told for a long time by many different people. For me personally, during the interviews, we try not to focus on the trauma, of course. And some people have still really shared traumatic experiences, and even knowing how bad things were, I still was shocked, I guess. And that has stayed with me and continues to disturb me. And I think actually that is a gift to feel disturbed by that and to not forget, and that I will carry it with me forever. Um, and it propels hopefully what I decide to do in the future. I think that I really cherish the experiences people have told me about how they were transformed, kind of like what I said before, and what Mahealani was sharing, that people have been transformed by these relationships that happen because they were really organizing and showing up together with people that they otherwise would not have been in such deep relationship with. And hearing them talk about that has brought an immense amount of joy, and seeing that those relationships have lasted for 4 years now. And people from all walks of life have really felt transformed by this event. Of course, also deeply harmed, but also transformed by what everyone has been able to accomplish and is still struggling to accomplish for the future, for each other. So that's what I hope to hold on to also from the stories I've heard.
Yeah, thank you for that. There was a question that came in for me asking if I could share how I've been affected physically, emotionally, et cetera, by the contaminated water. Um, I I had 9 people in my house when this all happened. My niece was living with me with her husband and their 3 young children while they were waiting for his medical discharge from the army. So we had 9 people under the roof and a cat. um, the cat stopped drinking the water. She would refuse her water until she got so dehydrated she absolutely had to drink. And then she would drink her water and she would just had this gargly, um, terrible meow. And she would get so sick and she would throw up and then she would avoid the water until she absolutely had to have it again. And that should have been a sign, right? Or at least, but the only thing it indicated was something's wrong with the cat. And so we all kept drinking the water. There were different opinions in the house as to whether or not the water was bad or whether the water was okay. Our water never smelled, but we did have an oily sheen on it. Um, I know that there were people who could take a bowl of water and light it on fire, but I wasn't able to do that. I did try, I held a lighter to the running water on the faucet and the water wouldn't put the lighter out. We all experienced, exasperated asthma, migraines. Some people in the house had rashes and various things. Long term, I now have migraines that I didn't have before, and the auras come from the brainstem. My migraines are rooted in the brainstem, and so it affects various body functions. Sometimes I lose speech and it's just a headache, or I'll lose balance or muscle like fatigue. I can't hold my head up. It looks worse than it is, but I joke and I'm like, it's just a headache. But that is something that is my long-term impact. I never had a neurological issue before the water crisis. Emotionally, my husband and we met when he was stationed in Alaska, and we got married, and I came here with him. And I had raised my kids in Alaska, lived there for 24 years, and raised them on well water. And then came here and was newly integrating into the military life and learning how to be a military spouse and shop at the commissary and all this brand new world, showing your ID every time you want to just go home, when the water crisis happened, it just never occurred to me to not believe the leadership. But some red flags that should have stood out is, I was never told there was something wrong with my water before I saw it on Facebook. Like there was no official communication. I saw concerns on Facebook and I was like, people have problems with their water. People are talking about being sick the way we're all sick, and there's 9 of us. What are the odds? And so that's when we started investigating and looking at the sheen. One of the people in the house who didn't believe anything was wrong with the water, they made macaroni and cheese for the kids. And everybody's had macaroni and cheese, and then it sits, like you have it for lunch, and then it sits on the counter for hours, right? And then it's supposed to like dry up. But at the end of the night, when we were cleaning the kitchen before bed, that bowl of macaroni and cheese was still sitting there, and it just was so shiny and pretty, like it was freshly made. And I was like, who used the water? Just yelling. So yeah, I I too was just hugely impacted, and I think that some of the emotional takeaways from the very beginning was, just that realization that you were being lied to after defending the words that leadership is giving you, and you just are saying, no, follow the guidance, follow the guidance. Why would they say anything else, And then all of a sudden, the message completely black and white changed within a few days. Suddenly, they're saying, oh, yeah, we knew that this was happening, and we, shut the well off days ago. And just that earth-shattering feeling in your head, like you're literally the people who are supposed to protect the civilians, so just a lot of that for me. I'll quit rambling. Sorry. um, Mahealani, there was another question for you. Do you, as a resident of Hawaii, trust the Navy's water test results?
Well, I'll give you my answer as a journalist, and
Yeah.
it's not my role to give an opinion.
There you go.
It is my role to continue to report on whatever is happening out in our community. You know, as we've been talking about this disaster, I know Ernie's been down there, and a few people have been down there. Red Hill never leaves you. And I remember being down there, even though I did say that the military did push back, they eventually would always relent and they would have to answer our questions. They would have to. It wasn't always easy, but after much prodding, they finally let us down there to kind of see what was going on and to see, where the spill had happened. And they kept telling us, oh, don't worry, it's safe down here and we've got ventilation. And after being down there in Red Hill, I mean, it's vast. And the tank that they showed us was actually nicknamed the show tank because it was empty, but that was where all the tours would be taken to. And so even though that tank had been empty for quite some time, it still smelled. And it's still I will never forget leaving the tank itself and going back outside after the tunnel. And once again, I felt kind of headachy and kind of foggy and just this weight. I mean, it's really unexplainable to me, but it was this spiritual weight that I felt of being at a place where there was so much destruction. And I could and to see everything that they were doing to try to make it right, I could only hope that what they were doing was the best course. So back to the question, which I didn't answer. Yeah, it's not my role to give an opinion, but I certainly, it is my role to report on whatever is out there.
Thank you for that. Somebody in the chat is a former inmate from the Palava Correctional Facility, and they have a story that is not dissimilar to those on base from the time frame, and they would like to be connected with any one of you who would be interested in hearing their story. So I will make that connection afterwards. But give me just 1 second. If it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and remove some spotlights. I thank you guys so much. I'm going to bring you back up. But for just a few minutes, I want to kind of highlight some of the community reflections and things that people have been saying. So give me just a second while I rearrange. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. There we go. Getting my screen ready because as I hit present, it got super small and it was not easy to see. So now it's ready. Throughout the conversation just now, people have shared some of their story and their sentiments in the chat. And these are just a bit few pieces of what has been said and shared. One person said it changed my whole outlook on life and reinforced that our voices matter. And if you see something, you need to say something. Another person shared, this was so emotional for me to relive. I only wish I was able to know years ago what we know now. I would never stop raising your voice. I would say to never stop raising your voice. This one here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. As I recall the beginning of Red Hill, the first thing I recall with a visual movie of the flashback playing in my mind is Thanksgiving. How I soaked my turkey in the sink with tap water for hours to thaw. I then cooked my turkey, and there was a weird smoky chemical smell in the house. And I was having to turn on fans and open doors for the smoky air to dissipate. And I knew I was a good cook. I had made many turkeys. When I looked out, or when I took out the turkey and touched it, the turkey imploded. The entire turkey caved in and bones were broken. And it was the strangest thing I'd ever seen. But because this was the only turkey I had made for Thanksgiving, my family ate it and we grew very extremely sick, vomiting and having diarrhea, among other symptoms. If I could look back, I would have questioned that a little more. But I had no idea that even through Thanksgiving weekend, that my water was contaminated. And when I called in and I had people laugh at me and say that there was nothing wrong with my water, I would have called the news because no one was believing me and no one was helping me. We were so sick. It hurts to think about. We live in Capilina Beach Homes, a community of over 1,400 homes owned by the Navy, former Barber Point Housing. It is managed and leased by the largest rental management company in the US. The Navy lied for 10 days that they did not provide water to us, but we knew that that was not true. Several of us tried to have a meeting at our beach pavilion, and HPD was there to observe us just in case we caused trouble. A news station was called to come out, and I understand they were kept out of our gate and not allowed in. In addition, a management person from Greystar was in the community, and I tried to see her. An appointment was made, but she canceled it, and I was told she was sick, so we were shut out. This person writes, I'd just like to share a reflection based on my experience researching the crisis for my dissertation from the start of the 2014 spill. As I've spent hours reading and analyzing the testimonies and transcripts right after the 2014 spill, for example, from the Red Hill Task Force meeting minutes and testimony from the 2015 AOC. It's both inspiring and haunting that so many folks from that time had significant foresight regarding risks to the future. Ernie mentioned that he wished he pushed the regulators more in 2014, but in reading those transcripts and dialogue between Ernie and the rest of the task force, he already did such a wonderful job being proactive in thinking about the risk to the aquifer. Marty Townsend, representing the Sierra Club, and so many other advocates also had the same foresight, and makes it all the more heartbreaking to know how correct they'd ultimately be. I feel incredibly privileged to be part of this community through my research and volunteer work. Thank you for organizing. This community member writes that their life changed. After being returned home, after being displaced from the contamination and being returned back to a still contaminated house, I lost my mother who had been contaminated and my 2 dogs and 1 cat who had also had hydrocarbon toxicity. When I saw Remember Red Hill, I remember my grief and my continued grief, and I cannot look at Vi the same. Every shower, every glass of water, I am hyper-focused on smell and look, and it's not over. I'm changed forever, as we all are. I would please like for my mother to be remembered today. If this is Remember Red Hill, I would like to remember my mother, Diana, with this Red Hill family, and remembering that my mother and my animals, and just want to say my heart is with you all. And this is long term. Pray for not short term for everyone, but want everyone to understand that this is not over. We are still being affected, we are still struggling, and we are still fighting to be heard. and will continue to do so. Had the Navy been completely transparent and told families about the air quality being as dangerous as the water, families could have been better protected. They knew the water was unsafe all summer and fall, and even lied about the beginning of the exposure, which all cost our families so dearly. So tragic that the institution does not have to live by the Honor Code UCMJ laws, but the individual service member who was poisoned does have to live by it. The screen is jumping as I scroll. This community member writes, I take pride in Kuleana as someone who had a responsibility for my elder in my family, my parent. It has increased to understand my responsibility in caring for the Vai and the Aina. My gratefulness to be a hand in family, community, land, and water. I will forever have an understanding that it takes a village, or in this case, it takes an island and more. We all have a hand in taking care of the beautiful island of Hawaii. I am not affected by the 2021 spill, but I am an ex-inmate of the Halawa Correctional Facility. There was long-term use of contaminated water, and it has affected a lot of people. Thank you for writing that. The cover-up has been far worse than the negligent acts that led to my family drinking fuel contaminated water in the first place. The failure to help and aid us has added an even deeper level of trauma and betrayal to the physical illness the water left us with. I continue praying that the Department of War would choose to right this wrong and actually help families versus denying us. This community member writes, Ernie, you fought hard for us. If you didn't stand as strong as you did in your parameters, I would have never put the pieces together that I did. You told us. And finally, mahalo for that variation, Mahealani. When you said that on the news, you validated me yet again. And you just validated me again with sharing this part of the story. Want to thank the community members who shared their stories. You can continue sharing your stories to be shared either in the Q&A here or even long after this meeting ends using the hashtag Remembering Red Hill and posting on social media if you would like. And we will continue gathering these stories and putting them together in a way that honors the experiences that took place. I would like to bring Mahealani and Ernie and Heidi back for just a minute. I'm going to ask you one last question. It's going to take a second while I add the spotlight back to each of you. When I have the recording after, I will be able to cut out the awkward parts. I would really like to hear from each of you what gives you hope. What gives you hope for the future and where we're going? Because we can't be stuck in where we've been. It's easy to feel like we are, but we are moving forward, right? Ernie, can you share what gives you hope?
I think one beautiful thing that I've learned through this experience, like everything else, a problem, a disaster, there are bright sides to it. One thing I've learned is the importance of community and how the varied community groups and individuals across our island and even across our state have kind of stood together with one voice in protection of our Vai. And I also see that it is not just the seniors like myself with that voice out there, but it's people of all ages, because this is, in my mind, this is not my generation issue. it's a generation to generation, a intergenerational issue for generations to come. Like the Kanaka Maoli would say, 7 generations. So our effort here needs to continue for 7 generations or more.
Thank you. Heidi, what gives you hope?
People said that Red Hill would not be shut down, and people say now that hoping and fighting for a demilitarized Hawaii and a demilitarized world is not possible or not realistic. But I feel hope when I think about the fact that that is the only realistic future. When we think about the long term, when we think about, like Ernie said, generations to come, that's actually the only realistic future. And I truly believe that our survival depends on it. Um, and I find hope in that despite all the suffering that is probably going to come because of other red hills, people everywhere are working together because they want to live in the future. It's as simple as that. And that gives me a lot of hope.
Absolutely. Mahealani, what gives you hope?
I'm first amazed at how Red Hill Kapukaki has really been a point in time for our entire community. It is continuing on the legacy of Red Hill has now come up every time we have another big event. And we're seeing it right now in the news with the talk over military land leases. I'm hopeful that it has reminded people and made us all wake up that we need to protect our resources, and that's something that we can all agree on. And in a small way, I'm hopeful to see these stories continuing with some of the survivors, that they are continuing their own successes within their own families. I I recall just the other day, Mandy Fight won a bunch of medals in some races that she's now doing. I've covered her story many times, and about the trauma and the pain and the illnesses that she and her family members are continuing to suffer, but to also see her triumph in her personal moments, swimming, diving into water and winning medals in these races, and seeing the kids that are now starting to grow up and they're graduating, and all of us are getting a little older, and all of these children, their stories that we followed, they're having their own successes. I mean, they are still deeply impacted by Red Hill, but they are also celebrating in their own personal ways, and by celebrating in their lives, it gives me hope that we can continue to remember, we can continue to ask the tough questions and demand more from our government and demand more from our regulators, but at the same time, come together and celebrate our own personal successes.
I agree. What gives me hope is the way that I have seen people come together in such strength and such unity from diverse parts of the community. And of course, now I'm working with the Red Hill Registry. I would like to just encourage everybody to enroll in the Red Hill Registry. That is something that gives me an immense amount of hope. Coming from the academic space and the academic background, but also being somebody who drank the fuel. One of the biggest things that we were told over and over is that the impacts we're feeling and seeing are psychosomatic, or they're not real, or how could it be from the jet fuel? We don't even know what the long-term impacts of long-term exposure to jet fuel look like. We don't know that this is that. And so the only way to respond to those types of statements is with documentation and factual information and telling our stories. And the Red Hill Registry is a way that we can do that. And there's two different kinds of enrollment. The baseline enrollment is for people who were on the water line from November 20, 2021 to March 18, 2022. That's very clear. It's very outlined. Everybody recognizes that. But I really want to highlight and stress, because it's important, that we have expanded enrollment. This is for people who were on the water line before November 20th, 2021, or after March 18, 2022. And it's also for that whole buffer area around, like the Halava prison or the schools that are right next to the water line, the restaurants that are there, the daycare centers. Ernie, you know better than any of us how water is fluid and these systems are connected. And how can we know that the person across the street got sick and this person didn't? Well, this is how we know. You have your story documented, and you talk about how, when, and where you used water with that pre-enrollment form, and then we go from there. So I would just like to encourage everybody. The website for the Red Hill Registry is redhillregistry.org. If anybody has questions for the registry or for the speakers today, if they didn't get asked, I will pass anything along that got into the Q&A after I was looking at it, and pass them to Ernie and Heidi and Mahealani. And then, but if you have questions for the Red Hill Registry, our email is info@redhillregistry.org. And we are also on social media, which is, we learn from the experience, right? The first place I learned that my water was probably bad was Facebook in a neighborhood group. So I understand in the military community especially, but even outside the military community, when now our population is spread globally, social media is going to be one of those big things that we need to reach that 93,000 who have dispersed and left. So check us out online at redhillregistry.org. We're on Instagram, Facebook, X, Blue Sky, Reddit, and we have YouTube, which is where we post any of the videos that are like today. On Reddit, we have created a subreddit where you can tell your story. The subreddit on there is called Remembering Red Hill. Share your story. Or if you're not on Reddit, you can share your story on any other social media platform using the hashtag Remembering Red Hill. It's a little bit early for us. We were going to go until 3, but I just want to thank the three of you for the time that you've set aside, and also for just opening up and allowing your personal and professional worlds to kind of collide here in front of everybody and talk about your story and share from your heart and your perspective. I feel like having these three perspectives is so powerful and so unique. And I just can't thank you enough. And I see all the hearts and I see all the clapping, and I just know that the community is also very, very thankful for each of you taking this time.
Thank you, Tara, and thank you to the Red Hill Registry. And I want to say again, thank you to Ernie and Mahealani for all your hard work.
Yeah, mahalo Heidi and Mahealani and Tara and the registry. And mahalo everybody for joining us and staying involved.
Yes.
Stay connected.
Stay involved. That's good parting words. Stay involved.
Mahalo nui.
Mahalo nui.
Mahalo.
Aloha.
Aloha.